Welcome to the Two Perspective Show with me, Reverend Lee, and my compadre here, Reverend Niranjan. This is our first podcast, and we are going to be exploring some of the most interesting concepts in the months and the years to come. And today we're going to start off by looking at this idea of consciousness. We hear the word so often, and so often we have no idea what we're talking about or what other people are talking about. So I'm going to open up and speak to Niranjan and say, Niranjan, to you, what does it mean when you hear the word consciousness?
Consciousness has two aspects. One is the limited aspect, and the other is the unlimited aspect. We are all familiar with the limited aspect through the mind and the body. The mind and the body-mind complex, a unit, is a tiny drop in the sea of consciousness. And the drop is trying to understand the whole. So the question we have got to ask ourselves is, do we first understand what this drop is about? And once we understand what this drop is about, is it similar to the whole? So if we understand ourselves, perhaps we would be able to understand the bigger picture. Ordinarily, when we try to understand the world around us, we use our five senses. Typically, it's what we see or hear creates an image in our mind of what the world is around us. Then comes the question, can we trust what we see? Can we trust what we hear? Because we know from science that solid matter is not solid. If you go down to the atomic level, it's mere space. So we're seeing a projection of a solid matter, and we're understanding this as a solid, tangible, material world. So that gets confusing if you start using the senses to understand the world around us, because we only understand the image that is projected in the mind. Perhaps another way to understand this concept of consciousness is to be simply aware. What does it mean to be aware? Well, we're aware of sounds and people around us and the noises. What we do with this awareness is we start to interpret this and create images and judgments and so on and so forth. And that creates another image in the mind. But if we step back and hold ourselves back and not interpret, project, recall, or even analyze the impressions coming in, then we can say that we're simply being aware. And the first thing we're aware of is the mind and its activity. And we're also aware of sensations from the body. The body is perfectly at rest and comfortable. It may not cause any disturbance. We may not even be aware of the body, but we're always aware of the mind. And mind is a good teacher. If we are able to watch the mind, not as a participant, but as an observer, perhaps we create that distance, and then we may be able to perceive the space in which the mind plays out. And that space is potentially infinite. You can't say that space has a boundary, but if you say it has a boundary, what's beyond the boundary? And the question goes on and on. So exploring consciousness, to me, starts with being aware of the surroundings, not identifying with, okay, I'm this body, I'm this entity, I am in these circumstances, but just being aware and being a participant of the greater existence around us. And one way to do this is through gratitude and joy, because when we're in gratitude and we're experiencing great joy, the I factor, the I am this, I am that, goes away, and we become one with everything. And through that oneness, outside and on the inside, the barrier between the outside and the inside, once it goes away, then perhaps the drop has dissolved into the whole.
You know, I love the analogy that you just did where you compared overall consciousness to the ocean and that we are a drop. All of us is the ocean, and yet we're not all of the ocean. That makes tremendous sense. And so for me, when we come to this idea of what does awareness mean, for me, awareness is something that I don't know that I or anyone can be aware 24/7. I don't know that we can be that aware, but as we become more aware, for me, it's like we're climbing a mountain. And the more aware we become, the higher on the mountain we go. And the higher on the mountain we go, we can see a broader view of what's out there. And so when we're on flat land, we can see so far. We go up 1,000 feet, we can see a lot further. We go up 2,000 feet, we go farther. But the fact of the matter is, the infinite is undescribable, and I don't believe in human form will ever get that. I think we are eternally evolving and will be seeking to unfold our level of awareness, whether it's in this life or in lives to come, whatever they look like. And so I love the idea of meditation because for me, meditation is a way I can reboot, slow my mind down, which thinks it's in control, and realize, okay, let's come back to awareness. Let's let go of the patterns of the past. Let's go of the habits of thinking. Let's go of all this limitation we've got in our minds and experience life even more.
I like your example of climbing up a mountain and seeing things from a distance. So the essence of what we're talking about with awareness is creating separation, a distance between the experience and the experiencer. So greater the distance between the experience and the experiencer, we go from being part of the experience to questioning who is the experiencer. And further away the experience, the more we get into the one who's experiencing. And investigation along those lines through a practice of awareness, where you're simply aware of that question, you're simply aware of the experience, you're simply aware of what is going on within you. That could also be what you mentioned. You mentioned meditation is a tool that you can use to still the mind and slow the mind. Perhaps another way to approach it is not to concentrate or make the mind focus on one thing or one idea, but just melt into relaxation. Awareness with relaxation. Perhaps that would not require a dedicated practice of meditation, and that can be done anywhere. We can be aware of the workplace. Internally, we can start to relax. We are tense within, and the tension emanates from our interpretations of the world. We want the world to be a certain way. We want people to be a certain way. And if they're not in accordance with what we want, and that heightens the internal tension, and then we try to create an inner experience that matches our ideas. But if we just let things go and say, okay, I'm going to walk into my workplace this morning, and I know yesterday was a bad day, but that's forgotten. Let me practice awareness and relaxation. So no matter what people say or do, I'm going to go about my work, do the best I can, and let people say or think what they wish. And I would just relax into my being. We feel so relaxed and refreshed that we naturally slip into a state of meditation effortlessly.
Well, you know, Niranjan, the whole idea of being aware and relaxing For me, it's like when you're the observer of your life, that means you're observing both sides. You're observing what you perceive as positive, you perceive as negative. And so you're seeing the allness of life. And when you see the allness of life, you don't have an emotional charge one way or the other. And so when you don't have an emotional charge, that's a natural state of relaxation. And when you come back to the whole idea, you hear the term about forgiveness all the time. The term forgiveness is really looking at an event as having only one side. Let's say I say something to you and hurt your feelings. And if I want you to forgive me, it's because I'm only seeing that what I said hurts you. But in another way, what I said probably helped you in some way. We're just not looking at it in that fashion right now.
If I may add one point, you mentioned that relaxing and not looking at things in whether they're positive or negative. Perhaps if we take awareness a step further back and not even recognize anything as positive or negative, just looking at it through a completely neutral lens, as if the mind doesn't exist. It doesn't cost us anything to put the mind aside for a few moments. It's not going to disappear for good. What we're looking at, with no judgment, with no feeling of this is right or this is wrong, but just listen for what it is. And then the words may make sense, the words may not make sense, but what we would then notice is the silence that pervades sound that is carried through the silence. And I think to get the message across, we really use words as props, but the real message comes through the silence and what we do with the silence that is surrounding our personal space. If the silence surrounding our personal space is full of mental junk that we're spilling into it, that's the impression we create with our words. But if we have the silent space full of just pure silence, the sense of goodness and being, and that will be carried in through our words. And through that, we can work on a deeper level with forgiveness, oneness, gratitude. No matter what the feeling or the emotion may be, it's going to have just the one flavor of oneness and wholeness.
Yeah, and you know, even the idea of gratitude, people like to say, I'm grateful for all the good that's happened to me. And it's more than that, I'm grateful for everything that happens to me, because there's good that comes out of everything. We just don't see it. And again, it goes back to a point you made at the very beginning of our discussion, becoming more aware. And that's really the key. How do I step back of me and observe me in a situation where that observer me that's looking at the situation has no emotion about it? It's just observing. It's just seeing that everything about it is perfect. And when that happens, you can be in any situation and you don't get tagged. You don't get drawn in. You don't get that animosity or whatever going, but you really get to observe life. And that's a fantastic place to be.
So silence and awareness, relaxation, those are my three go-to things to keep my being happy, whole, and contented.
And you know, the silence thing, and you just really expounded on this beautifully, silence allows you to hear the infinite wisdom that is within you, give you the guidance to handle whatever's in front of you. And most of the time, the great wisdom doesn't come from the memories that are stored in the brain, but the great wisdom in dealing with new situations comes from that infinite nature that's within us that knows all things, but we can't hear it until we're still and we listen.
You know, the mind is like a supercomputer. It can compute so many different things, ideas, thoughts at the same time. And there's so much information that is being stored on a continual basis, not just the ones that we're identified with and we resonate with, but there's so much other information that's going in passively. Perhaps when we are silent, it might start to bring up messages and answers to questions that are of practical significance. And from that place of silence, sometimes you get these ideas, I can do it this way or do it the other way. So silence has a lot of benefits. It's a true companion, I would say, to our wholeness.
You know, one of the tools that was given to me by this person who was a hypnotist shared with me that one of the things that to get an answer to a question that you've got, he said the first thing you do is right before you go to bed. I mean, the last thing you do before you go to bed, you ask the infinite wisdom within you to bring you the clarity that you desire in the situation you're facing. And then you let it go. And you go into the silence of sleep. And what's amazing is every time I do that, in the middle of the night or sometime the next day or maybe the day after, the answer comes. When I least expect it, there's the answer because I've turned it over to something greater than my ego. And you know, so I think based on where we are right now, we've just begun to explore this whole idea of consciousness. I think we've looked at the idea that consciousness is something that cannot be described in the totality of what it is. It's infinite, and from it, it created everything, and each of us is a point of consciousness within it. We've talked about how do we use our individual consciousness to become more aware so that we can experience more, so that we can connect and tap in more. And I think one of the things that we want to do in this podcast that we're doing is each week bring to you, the audience, those listening, tools that allow you to have a greater experience of life, where you no longer are a slave to your mind, you no longer are a slave to your body, but you are the master of your mind and you are the master of your body. And so I'm going to sign off for myself and for my brother Niranjan and wish you all a great week. And we look forward to seeing you on our next podcast. Do us a favor. If you like this, subscribe to our channel, send it out to everyone you know. Let them know they're these two guys and they're exploring these great concepts and they want you to be a part of it. And in the comments below, write all the feedback you can, because we're going to address that in the upcoming episodes. Until the next time, know that you are loved, know that you are worthy, and know that you are perfect just the way you are. Until then, have a great day.